On Sunday, July 20th, a national anti-abortion group interrupted the Sunday worship service at First Unitarian Universalist Church of New Orleans. They were there to hold a protest inside their sanctuary, shouting angry words and condemning the members of the congregation during a moment of silent meditation. Many of you may have read about what happened in New Orleans in July. The protesters targeted a Unitarian Universalist congregation specifically because of our association's historic commitment to the idea that a woman's right to control her own body is a basic human right. We have been asked to join others in standing on the side of love with First Unitarian Universalist of New Orleans and make a donation in their honor to the Planned Parenthood that serves New Orleans. One of the other reasons they were targeted is because they have partnered with Planned Parenthood in a building of a new office in New Orleans. And so the special collection today is to honor the nonviolent response of our congregation members to this assault on their sacred space one Sunday in July. If you're writing a check, you can make it out to CVUUF, write Planned Parenthood on the memo line. Everything that we receive today will go to Planned Parenthood of New Orleans to honor our sister congregation, First Unitarian Universalist in New Orleans. This morning's offering will now be given and received.
My Faith in Nonviolence by Mohandas K. Gandhi. The law of love will work, just as the law of gravitation will work, whether we accept it or not. Just as a scientist will work wonders out of various applications of the law of nature, even so a person who applies the law of love with scientific precision can work greater wonders. For the force of nonviolence is infinitely more wonderful and subtle than the material forces of nature, like, for instance, electricity. The people who discovered for us the law of love were greater scientists than any of our modern scientists. Only our explorations have not gone far enough, and so it is not possible for everyone to see its workings. Such, at any rate, is the hallucination, if it is one, under which I am laboring. The more I work at this law, the more I feel the delight in life, the delight in the scheme of the universe. It gives me a peace and a meaning of the mysteries of nature that I have no power to describe.
Please join me in a brief meditation. I invite you to close your eyes or to close them slightly, looking down the bridge of your nose. Turning your focus inward, staying present, not sinking into this inward focus, but remaining open and strong and present now. Breathing, noticing the breath. Noticing what you've carried in here this morning with you, what burdens you can now set down, what thoughts you can now let go of. Noticing, being the observer of your breath, of your mind, of your own life's drama. Noticing so that you can be more present to what the world offers. The world has offered so much this past week. What do we do with it? Gandhi says the law of love will work, just as the law of gravitation will work, whether we accept it or not, whether we believe in it or not. We can rest in this love. The law of love will work. noticing, being present, being fully present to your own pain and the pain of the world. Rest in this law. Rest in this love. You don't have to think your way through this. You don't maybe have to feel your way through this. Let the love move through you and take you with it to make sense of this week. To make sense of your own pain and the pain of the world. Breathing together, resting in this love together, as one body, we enter a moment of silence.
From Being Peace by Thich Nhat Hanh. It is said that half the boat people fleeing Vietnam died in the ocean. Only half arrived at the shores of Southeast Asia. There were many young girls, boat people, who were raped by sea pirates. One day we received a letter telling us about a young girl on a small boat who was raped by a Thai pirate. She was only 12, and she jumped into the ocean and drowned herself. When you first learn of something like that, you get angry at the pirate. You naturally take the side of the girl. As you look more deeply, you will see it differently. If you take the side of the little girl, then it is easy. You only have to take a gun and shoot the pirate. But we can't do that. In my meditation, I saw that if I had been born in the village of the pirate and raised in the same condition he was, I would now be the pirate. There is a great likelihood that I would have become a pirate. I can't condemn myself so easily. In my meditation, I saw that many babies are born along the Gulf of Siam. Hundreds every day, and if we, educators, social workers, politicians, and others do not do something about the situation, in 25 years, a number of them will become sea pirates. That is certain. If you or I were born today in those fishing villages, we might become a sea pirate in 25 years. If you take a gun and shoot the pirate, you shoot all of us, because all of us are, to some extent, responsible for this state of affairs.
If you take a gun and shoot the pirate, you shoot all of us. Because all of us are to some extent responsible for this state of affairs. If you take a gun and shoot Michael Brown, you shoot all of us. If you take a gun and shoot Trayvon Martin, Ezell Ford, Renisha McBride, John Crawford, Jordan Davis, or Oscar Grant, you shoot all of us. Because all of us are to some extent responsible for this state of affairs. When I first heard about yet another shooting of an unarmed young black man, I was slow to respond. It has become hard to sift through all of the news of the day and to keep up with what directly impacts me, my family, or the congregation I serve. Michael Brown was shot Saturday, August 9th. I heard about it, but didn't really start tuning into the news coming out of Ferguson, Missouri until late Wednesday night. I had been tuned into the news about Robin Williams. The world-famous comedian had killed himself, and all of us watched with heartbreaking disbelief as the life of someone who seemingly had it all was felled by depression, anxiety, and addiction. I don't have to look far from my small circle of friends, family, and congregation members to know what Robin Williams may have been feeling in the last hours of his life. I cannot begin to imagine how Michael Brown felt when he held up his arms and pleaded for his life. So I do feel somewhat authorized to tell the story of a manic, depressive, recovering addict. But in response to yet another shooting of an unarmed black man, I feel inadequate and inept. I cannot begin to imagine how Michael Brown felt when he held up his arms and pleaded for his life. I cannot begin to imagine how the police officer felt when he made the decision to shoot a young man with his arms in the air saying, "Don't shoot." Yet, that is what Thich Nhat Hanh asks us to do when he tells the story of the 12-year-old Vietnamese girl who drowns herself after being raped by a pirate. He asks us to imagine ourselves into the life of the other. When you first learn of something like that, you get angry at the pirate. You naturally take the side of the girl, he writes. When I first heard the story of Michael Brown's death, I got angry at the unnamed cop. Others did not. Others got angry at the looters. They got angry at the stereotype of a thug painted vividly by media accounts and the police. The story is always the same. Some people deserve to die, and those with the power are the ones who decide. It can't be that easy. Can it? As we look more deeply, we can see it differently. We can learn to love our enemies, hope for a world where peace is possible, and imagine ourselves into the lives of pirates, thugs, cops, and killers. We can come to trust what Gandhi said: the law of love will work, just as the law of gravitation will work, whether we accept it or not. The law of love will work. Easy for me to say. I'm a middle-aged white woman who never had to coach her sons about how to behave in a way that is deemed to be above suspicion. Sure, I've had to worry about the safety of my daughters, but I don't have to worry about getting the phone call that tells me my son was killed by police in a Walmart when he playfully picked up a BB gun off a shelf in the toy department. There is a racial disparity in this country that is easy to ignore when it happens to someone else's kids, in someone else's town, in someone else's neighborhood. I am struggling with this. Is anyone else? It helps to know that other people of privilege are struggling right along with us. Here's what Unitarian Universalist minister Reverend Meg Riley wrote this week for the Huffington Post. Right now, I would locate myself as one of the mostly silent, but increasingly alarmed white folks, one who has the class and race privilege to be on the sidelines, struggling to discern how to be part of the solution instead of part of the problem. As one of the mostly silent but increasingly alarmed white folks standing on the sidelines, I have found myself caught up this week in the social media frenzy, retweeting and reposting every comment and post I agreed with and some I didn't agree with, desperate to understand, what am I supposed to do now? In one of the posts I found, some help about what I'm supposed to do now, written by a woman named Janae Woods, who is a program officer for Everyday Democracy. She actually wrote 12 things I could do right now to be a better white ally to black people after the Michael Brown killing. You can find it online if you want to. I want to share 6 of those things with you this morning, because I think they are the 6 that are the most important to us as Unitarian Universalists with a large percentage of white allies in our midst. Here is the first one. Learn about the racialized history of Ferguson and how it reflects the racialized history of America. The Unitarian Universalist Association offers multiple programs to help with a congregation's intentional multicultural ministry and racial justice work. Building the world we dream about empowers Unitarian Universalists to become more welcoming of racial, ethnic, and cultural diversity, and to dismantle racism within and outside the congregation. Examining Whiteness, an anti-racism curriculum, is intended for white individuals and groups who want to further deepen their white anti-racist identities. These are both good places to start. But you don't have to take a class to learn that Ferguson's population is 2/3 black, and its more than 50-person police force includes just 3 black officers. In 2013, black people accounted for 86% of all traffic stops and 92% of searches and arrests. You don't have to take a class to see what Thich Nhat Hanh saw in his meditation about the pirate. I saw that if I had been born in the village of the pirate and raised in the same conditions he was, I would now be the pirate. If I had been born to black parents instead of white parents, I would tell a different story about myself. I would have a different family history to tell. I couldn't brag about my Revolutionary War ancestor or visit his grave in upstate New York. If I had been born black, I might not be able to find records of my ancestors or know where they were buried, because slaves were property, not people. My immigrant ancestors wouldn't have been allowed to own a factory in mid-19th century Brooklyn, New York, if they were African instead of German. My parents and their parents before them would not have owned homes because of decades of housing discrimination. Legal housing discrimination. There would be no accumulated wealth, no access to higher education, no annual vacations or semesters abroad. If I had been born in Ferguson, Missouri, and raised in the same conditions Michael Brown was, well, I would not be standing here today. I am not ashamed of who I am because of an accident of birth. But I do know that with privilege comes responsibility. Here is another thing I can do. Refuse to engage in conversations about what kind of kid he was and lift up the Black Lives Matter narrative. Unitarian Universalist covenant to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person. It should not matter whether Michael Brown was involved in what police are calling a strong-armed robbery. Strong-armed, meaning there was a scuffle between the suspect and the store owner over an attempted shoplifting. Strong-armed, but not with these arms, not gun arms. Even if the officer did know that Michael Brown was a suspect in the recent shoplifting, which the officer did not know, why is there a narrative that renders some people deserving of death and others not? As a people who live our values in the world, we can begin to change the conversation. We can say all Black lives matter because we say all lives matter. Here is another one from Janae Wood's list. Understand the modern forms of race oppression and slavery and how they are intertwined with policing, the courts, and the prison industrial complex. During our General Assembly in Phoenix 2 years ago, Unitarian Universalists learned that Joe Arpaio's tent city is not just a symbol of our broken immigration system. Tent City is a symbol of a new era, what Michelle Alexander identifies in her book called The New Jim Crow. This new era is the new Jim Crow. The mass incarceration of poor people of color in this country is a new caste system. It is the moral equivalent of Jim Crow. Now, Michelle Alexander, who was a law professor and is a civil rights advocate and writer, had her eyes first opened to the emergence of this new caste system while she was helping former inmates re-enter into a society that, in her estimation, didn't have much use for them in the first place. The trumped-up war on drugs, the increasing power of the prison industrial complex, and numerous government policies have created a system of discrimination that is similar to the Jim Crow laws put in place by a racist society responding to the end of slavery. Unitarian Universalists have read this book, many of us. It was our common read for our association last year. And I think we are just beginning to understand the modern forms of race oppression and slavery. We can also, according to Janae Woods, adhere to the philosophy of nonviolence as you resist racism and oppression. Gandhi said, "The force of nonviolence is infinitely more wonderful and subtle than the material forces of nature." Nelson Mandela sought reconciliation rather than revenge. The Dalai Lama has compassion for the ones who exiled him and killed his loved ones. Influenced by Gandhi, Dr. King utilized nonviolent resistance as a key strategy in the civil rights movement. But they are looting, you have heard. They deserve to be met with rubber bullets, tear gas, and force, you might be thinking. But they are also working with Amnesty International to be trained in nonviolent responses. They also stood outside stores and shops, protecting the premises from the violence of a small number. It is easy to adhere to the philosophy of nonviolence from the safety of our own living rooms. It is easy to cut ourselves off from suffering people. But we can't do that. We are Unitarian Universalists. We don't do that. And so she says to us, if you are a person of faith, look to your scriptures or holy texts for guidance. As a Unitarian Universalist, I look to all of the world's scriptures and holy texts for guidance. I also look to the words and deeds of prophetic women and men, which challenge us to confront powers and structures of evil with justice, compassion, and the transforming power of love. This week, as I've been struggling with being one of the mostly silent but increasingly alarmed white folks standing on the sidelines, I've read portions of Gandhi's autobiography and portions of Nelson Mandela's autobiography, looking for guidance. I've remembered our study of Karen Armstrong's 12 Steps to a Compassionate Life and continued to ask myself, what do we do with all of this anger? We begin, as Armstrong reminds us in the 12 Steps to a Compassionate Life, we begin with ourselves. First, we direct compassion to ourselves, then to a person who is neutral to us, then to somebody we dislike, and then finally, the circle widens to our enemy. Our enemy has many names: injustice, fear, pain, complacency, despair, blame, silence. These disembodied abstractions take on the face of a person, a religion, or a nation when we feel threatened or deprived of our basic rights. Does what is happening right now in Ferguson, Missouri threaten me? I don't think so. Does the racism that still exists in this country threaten me, this increasingly alarmed white woman standing on the sidelines? Yes, but not like it threatens many. It threatens me because, as a deeply religious Unitarian Universalist, I know that if you take a gun and shoot Michael Brown, you shoot all of us. Because all of us are to some extent responsible for this state of affairs. As a white ally, I am not ashamed of who I am because of an accident of birth. Because I know that with privilege comes responsibility. The last thing on Janae Wood's list is, and she's speaking to us as white allies, don't give up. In 1853, Unitarian minister, abolitionist, and in today's language, white ally Theodore Parker declared, "I do not pretend to understand the moral universe. The arc is a long one. My eye reaches but little ways. I cannot calculate the curve and complete the figure by the experience of sight. I can divine it by conscience. But from what I see, I am sure it bends towards justice." We can learn to love our enemies, hope for a world where peace is possible, and imagine ourselves into the lives of pirates, thugs, cops, and killers. We can come to trust what Gandhi said. The law of love will work, just as the law of gravitation will work, whether we accept it or not. May it be so. And may we be the people to make it so.
We are the Caneo Valley Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. Our mission is to nurture spiritually courageous people who transform the world through justice and compassion. Like us on Facebook, check out our website at CVUUF.org, or come visit us. See you soon!